Welcome to the Bible Forum. Every Sunday night, 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern, right here on thebibleforum.net. You can see this program. We're doing stuff, and it's new every week. Tonight, I want to give you a little biblical prophecy. I want to show you some biblical prophecy that is being fulfilled right now. Going back in Israel's history, in the 25th year of Israel's captivity to Babylon, the prophet Ezekiel was presented with the pre-incarnate Christ, and he was taken on a trip. On this trip, he was introduced to a future Israel and a future temple. Beginning in Ezekiel chapter 40, he begins to write of this vision, a vision in which he was transported to Israel, where a divine messenger was holding a measuring rod. This messenger gives Ezekiel a tour of that temple, measuring the various walls, the gates, the courts, and so forth. In one scene, Ezekiel is treated to an earlier vision, chapter 10, that of the departing of the glory of the Lord from the temple. Then here in chapter 43 is the return of that glory to inhabit a new temple. Now, biblical scholars acknowledge that the temple vision, which occurs in the last 9 chapters of Ezekiel, presents special challenges in regard to its interpretation. Some have even described it as the most difficult passage in the Old Testament. Be that as it may, and it is, what Ezekiel saw was a renewed temple and renewed temple worship at a time future in Israel's history. At the end of the vision, Ezekiel 48:38, the angel, pre-incarnate Christ, no doubt, declares that the name of the city, Jerusalem, from that day, presumably forward, shall be called Jehovah Shammah. Literally, the Lord is there. Now, clearly that has not happened. Although Israel is very close to building another temple next to the Islamic Dome of the Rock, historically, biblically, that's where it has to go. Scholars have always argued the point because, we got this Islamic thing up there, is not enough room. But now we have discovered, apparently, that there is room. Archaeologists have dug down below the wall and have found outside the gate, and they have found what appears to be another gate that was much lower down, and it was over to the right, significantly that it can be directly across from a rebuilt temple. That's where it has to be. The Lord of glory enters through the eastern gate to the temple. All of this seems to point to the Great Tribulation and further on into the millennial reign of Christ. There being nothing left to occur in terms of biblical prophecy except the Great Tribulation. Currently, Israel is back in the land. She is the focal point of her enemies round about. Bible. She is dominating the region economically, scientifically, militarily, politically. And our current president is doing more to elevate and protect Israel than any president during our entire existence as a nation. All that in 2 years. All of this points to an impending crescendo of events already predicted, thereby already settled. Meaning that Israel will come under great attack by her neighbors. That the Western world will come to her aid. That all of this will occur in a time of great catastrophes, both human and divine. a time that is going to be marked by war and pestilence and famine and drought, by stellar catastrophe as 1/3 of the planet is destroyed, by gross demonic religion masquerading as Christianity or some such thing, by the deaths of 1/3 of the world's population, by the rage of Satan against God, and by 144,000 preachers of the gospel of the kingdom, Jewish men, virgins all, men who win a multitude of people to Christ. They are not made Christians. Christians are gone, but they are won to Christ as believers. A group the Bible says no man can number. In the midst of all this are a number of auxiliary prophecies regarding events important to the purpose, not the least of which is the rebuilding of the Jewish temple, and, for this discussion, the desalinization of what the Bible simply calls the sea. Later on, the Romans called it the Dead Sea, because there's no life there. However, the Dead Sea was not always like that. In Genesis chapter 13, Lot looked out over the plain of Jordan, and the Bible says he beheld that it was well watered everywhere, before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, even as the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, as it cometh unto Zoar. It was only after God's judgment of the 5 cities of the plain, Sodom and Gomorrah being but 2, that the sea became deadly to animals and vegetable life. And it has stayed that way for thousands of years. But the Dead Sea today is anything but dead. More than 1,300 feet below sea level, the Dead Sea is home to all sorts of mineral wealth, as well as microorganisms and growing vegetation. The mineral wealth provides income for a number of industries. Still, it's not alive like the oceans or the freshwater seas. But the Bible indicates one day it will be. In the same passage that speaks of the temple of Israel that Ezekiel saw, he saw the door of the house, talking about the temple, and behold, waters issued out from under the threshold of the house, heading eastward. The house standing toward the east, the front of the temple, faces east. And the waters come down from under the right side of the house, at the south side of the altar, going down to the desert and into the sea. A sea which, being brought forth life as the waters are healed. Ezekiel 47. We're getting a glimpse of all of this today. The Dead Sea is marked by what is called hypersalinization. The environment is 37% salt, almost 10 times saltier than the ocean. And there is a tremendous scarcity of any form of aquatic life. But the Dead Sea is anything but really dead. An Israeli photographer by the name of Noam Badin writes about the Dead Sea Revival Project, calling it the 8th wonder of the world. He says in the Dead Sea are large sinkholes that were discovered in 2001. The floors of these sinkholes are carpeted with microorganisms. And on the sea's shore, presumably around these sinkholes, are fish and algae. Badin has witnessed fish in the Dead Sea sinkholes, microorganism growing vegetation, for several years. Millions of visitors come to the Dead Sea every year seeking life through the body of water's high oxygen levels and special minerals. And the great concern from this group of scientists that is in question here is that the water is being diverted from the Sea of Galilee and consequently from the Jordan River for agricultural purposes. If that were to cease, the water would come down to the Dead Sea and it would begin to live again. Along with the evaporation that caused the Dead Sea mineral works. So you've got a yes and no, a good and bad. Yes, the water would come back and life would return, but this industry would go away. He maintains that it is mankind that is keeping the Dead Sea from regaining life. They can see all this because the Dead Sea has these sinkholes, underwater sources seeping up fresh water. And this fresh water is meeting the sediment layers and is melting the sediment. The result is the sinkholes have a salt content that's less than 1.5%. It's water you could drink, and it's water that will support life. What the fresh water from under the door of the temple will do during the millennial reign of Christ, nature is already signaling. Were the Jordan not limiting the amount of fresh water reaching the Dead Sea, were the Sea of Galilee not being hindered from discharging fresh water downstream, perhaps the Dead Sea wouldn't be so dead today. But of course it will remain so. It is a testimony. It is a marker. The 5 cities of the plain, one of which was called Sodom. Sodom for the evil behaviors that marked those cities. But one day, when Jesus is in charge, life will return to that which is dead, in this case, water. But concerning animal life, the Bible indicates that not one, presumably no animals, will die during the great millennial reign of the Prince of Peace. We call all of this sort of thing lessons in nature. Subtle and not so subtle lessons regarding God, Jesus, sin, judgment, and salvation.